Story 1. The Night Watch. Lila stared at the clock on the living room wall, its soft ticking the only sound breaking the silence. It was nearing 10 p.m., and she was alone in the spacious suburban house. She had agreed to babysit the Robinsons' 8-year-old son, Timmy, thinking it would be an easy way to make extra cash before the holidays. The Robinsons were kind and had assured her it would be a quiet night. Timmy had been asleep for hours, leaving Lila alone with her phone and a stack of magazines. The house was massive, much larger than she was used to. It had sprawling, dimly lit hallways, tall windows that reflected the darkness outside, and furniture that seemed too perfect to touch. Though the Robinsons had left most of the lights on for her, the sheer size of the house made her feel exposed, like she could never see enough of it at once. To distract herself, Lila scrolled through her phone, occasionally glancing toward the baby monitor on the coffee table. The small screen displayed a grainy black and white feed of Timmy's room. He was curled up under his blanket, his chest rising and falling steadily. She felt a pang of relief every time she saw him move. The quiet felt oppressive, like a heavy weight pressing against her chest. She tried turning on the TV, but every channel was either static or late-night infomercials. The ticking of the clock grew louder in her ears. Then there was a sound, a faint thump from upstairs. Lila froze, her eyes darting toward the ceiling. It was probably nothing. Old houses made noises, right? She forced herself to laugh. Just the house settling, she whispered to herself, but her voice sounded too loud in the empty room. Still, she grabbed the remote and muted the TV, straining to hear. For a few seconds, there was nothing but silence. Then came another thump, followed by what sounded like soft, deliberate footsteps. Her heart raced. She glanced at the baby monitor. Timmy was still in bed, undisturbed. Whatever she was hearing wasn't coming from his room. Lila stood, her knees feeling weak. She told herself she was being paranoid, but her imagination was already running wild. What if someone had broken in? The Robinsons had an alarm system. Had they forgotten to set it? She grabbed her phone and hovered her thumb over the screen, ready to dial 911, but then she stopped herself. What would she even say? That she thought she heard footsteps? What if it really was just the house settling? Taking a deep breath, Lila decided to check it out. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer just in case. Slowly, she climbed the stairs, wincing at the creak of each step. The upstairs hallway was long and dark, the soft glow of Timmy's nightlight spilling out from under his door at the far end. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. No answer. Lila tightened her grip on the flashlight and moved toward the guest room. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was empty, the neatly made bed untouched. She checked the closets, the ensuite bathroom. Nothing. Her breathing slowed, and she felt a little silly. Of course, no one was there. She turned to leave, but as she stepped back into the hallway, she froze. The door to the attic, at the end of the hall, was open. The Robinsons hadn't mentioned the attic. Lila stared at the dark rectangle in the ceiling. The pull-down ladder extended as if someone had just climbed up. Her flashlight beam trembled as she pointed it toward the opening. "Is anyone there?" she called out. Her voice echoed faintly, but there was no response. Her instincts screamed at her to go back downstairs, lock the door, and call the police. But she couldn't leave Timmy. The little boy was sleeping just a few doors away. If someone was in the house, she had to make sure he was safe. Steeling herself, Lila climbed the ladder. Each rung creaked under her weight, and the air grew colder the higher she went. When her head cleared the opening, she swept the flashlight around the attic. The space was filled with dusty boxes and old furniture draped in white sheets. The beam of light landed on a rocking chair in the corner, which swayed gently back and forth, as if someone had just been sitting there. Lila's breath caught in her throat. She scanned the room again, but there was no one there. "This isn't funny," she whispered, backing down the ladder. When she reached the hallway, she pulled the ladder up and slammed the attic door shut, locking it. Her hands were shaking as she turned toward Timmy's room. She had to check on him. When she opened his door, relief flooded through her. Timmy was still asleep, his small face peaceful. The nightlight bathed the room in a soft glow. Lila stood there for a moment, watching him, her nerves beginning to settle. And then she saw it. The closet door was ajar. It had been closed earlier. She was sure of it. Her blood turned to ice as she noticed the faintest movement, something shifting in the shadows of the closet. She stepped back, her flashlight beam fixed on the door. "Timmy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The boy didn't stir. The closet door creaked open wider, and Lila's flashlight flickered. She fumbled with it, slapping the side until the beam steadied. Something stepped out of the closet. At first, she thought it was a person, a tall, thin figure, but its proportions were all wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its eyes gleamed in the faint light, and its mouth twisted into a smile that stretched too wide. Lila couldn't move. She couldn't scream. The figure raised a long, skeletal finger to its lips, as if to shush her. She stumbled backward, her legs giving out as she hit the floor. The creature turned its gaze toward Timmy, who was still asleep, blissfully unaware. "No," Lila whispered, her voice cracking. She scrambled to her feet and lunged for the boy, pulling him out of bed. Timmy woke with a start, his sleepy confusion quickly turning to terror as he saw the figure looming over them. Lila bolted from the room, clutching Timmy to her chest. She could hear the thing following them, its footsteps light but deliberate. She didn't dare look back. She ran down the stairs and out the front door, not stopping until she reached the middle of the street. Her heart pounded as she glanced back at the house. The windows were dark, and the front door hung open, but there was no sign of the figure. "What's wrong?" Timmy whimpered, his small hands clutching her shirt. Lila didn't know how to answer. She held him close, her eyes fixed on the house. And then, in the upstairs window, she saw it. The figure stood there, watching them, its head tilted in that same unnatural angle. It raised its hand, and for a moment, Lila thought it was waving, but then she realized it was beckoning her to come back. The police found them an hour later, huddled on the curb. The officers searched the house but found no one inside. They chalked it up to a prank or Lila's imagination, but she knew better. She never babysat again. End of the story. Story 2. Whispers in the Pines. The fire crackled softly, its orange glow barely pushing back the oppressive darkness of the forest. Mia sat alone on a weathered log, wrapped in a thick blanket, her tent set up a few feet away. This solo camping trip was supposed to be an adventure, a chance to prove to herself she could conquer her fears. But as the shadows stretched and the woods grew silent, she wasn't so sure anymore. The forest felt alive, but not in the comforting way she had imagined. The trees loomed tall and skeletal, their branches clawing at the starless sky. A light breeze whistled through the pines, carrying with it faint, indistinct sounds. At first, Mia told herself it was just animals, raccoons, maybe a deer. But the longer she listened, the more it felt deliberate. She poked at the fire with a stick, trying to focus on its warmth. "Just your imagination," she muttered under her breath. The words felt hollow. A loud snap echoed from the trees behind her, like a branch breaking underfoot. Mia froze, her pulse quickening. She turned slowly, her flashlight trembling in her hand as she shone it toward the noise. The beam illuminated nothing but endless rows of trees and tangled underbrush. "Hello," she called out, hating how shaky her voice sounded. The forest didn't answer. Trying to calm herself, Mia reasoned it could be a small animal, maybe even the wind. She returned to her seat by the fire, her back now firmly against the trunk of a large tree for a semblance of protection. Minutes passed and the silence grew heavier. Then she heard it, a faint whisper. It wasn't the wind this time. It was a voice, low and indistinct, drifting through the trees. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Is someone there?" she called, her voice barely louder than a whisper itself. Again, no reply. She grabbed her phone, hoping to find some comfort in the glow of the screen, but there was no signal. The isolation weighed on her, pressing in from all sides. The whispers came again, closer this time, circling her camp. She couldn't make out the words, but there was a cadence to them, like a chant. The fire began to die, the wood hissing and popping as the flames flickered lower. Mia scrambled to add more logs, but her hands were shaking too much to stack them properly. She cursed under her breath, finally getting the fire to flare up again. And then she saw them. Eyes. Dozens of them, reflecting the firelight from the shadows beyond the trees. They blinked in unison, staring at her unrelentingly. Mia's breath hitched, her flashlight shaking as she pointed it toward the figures. The beam revealed nothing, just trees and empty forest floor. But the eyes didn't vanish when the flashlight swept past them. They lingered, unblinking. A cold dread crept up her spine. She backed away from the fire, edging closer to her tent, her instincts screaming at her to run. But to where? She was miles from civilization, deep in the woods with no signal and no help. The whispers grew louder, surrounding her. They weren't random anymore. They were speaking her name. Mia. Mia. The voices were raspy, hollow, and impossibly close, as if they were breathing the words directly into her ear. "No," she whispered, clutching her flashlight like a lifeline. "This isn't real. This isn't happening." But it was. The eyes moved closer, encircling her camp, their presence palpable. Shapes began to emerge from the shadows, tall, gaunt figures with impossibly long limbs and faces obscured by darkness. They didn't walk, they glided, their movements unnaturally smooth. Mia bolted for her tent, diving inside and zipping it shut. She knew it was a flimsy barrier, but it was all she had. She grabbed her camping knife, clutching it tightly in her trembling hands. Outside, the whispers turned to laughter, low, guttural, and mocking. The tent walls rippled as if something was brushing against them, and the laughter grew louder, echoing all around her. Mia's breathing was ragged, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She wanted to scream, but she knew it wouldn't help. She pressed her back against the far side of the tent, clutching the knife, waiting for whatever was out there to make its move. The laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by deafening silence. Mia strained to hear, her ears ringing in the absence of sound. Then a single whisper cut through the stillness, directly behind her. "Mia!" She screamed, spinning around with the knife, slashing at the thin fabric of the tent. Her blade cut through the material, letting in the cold night air. But there was nothing there. She scrambled out of the tent, her flashlight darting wildly through the trees. The fire had gone out completely, leaving her in near total darkness. The forest was silent again, but the oppressive feeling of being watched hadn't left. She backed away from the tent, her knife still clutched in her hand. And then she felt it, a cold, bony hand on her shoulder. Mia spun around, but there was nothing there. The whisper came again, this time from in front of her. "You can't leave." She ran. She didn't know where she was going, didn't care. Branches clawed at her face and arms as she tore through the underbrush, the whispers following her, growing louder and more chaotic. The eyes appeared again, blinking at her from the darkness, their glow surrounding her from every direction. Her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard, the knife skittering out of her hand. She scrambled to get up, but a figure loomed over her, its gaunt form blotting out the faint moonlight. Its face was a void, featureless and black, but she could feel it staring at her, pulling her in. Mia screamed as the forest seemed to close in around her, the whispers consuming her completely. When morning came, the campsite was empty. Her tent stood open, her belongings untouched. The forest was quiet, save for the rustling of the wind through the pines. Mia was never found, but campers in those woods sometimes hear whispers at night, soft, raspy voices that seem to call their names.